Okay, today I'm talking about this idea of developing your coach's toolbox, specifically this idea of teachable chunks. So there's an accompanying blog post here, and there are also some other videos that are relevant. I would look at the crawling video and the kettlebell video, which I'll include in the blog post. So what is a teachable chunk? Well, a teachable chunk is I've got a definition here. I just wrote it down, but it works pretty well. So I'm going to say it's a series of coaching techniques delivered in a logical progression to best communicate a new idea or movement or solve a problem. And teachable chunks can be a combination of all different kinds of coaching techniques. They could be movements, so introducing movements in a progressive and logical way, maybe from lesser complexity to more complexity. It could be a series of questions or elicitations to get people thinking about things. It could be an example. It could be a demonstration that you do. It could be a drill or a series of drills, but really what it is, it's a combination of all these things. And what I would say is a teachable chunk solves a problem. And the problem is that you're introducing a new movement or you're refreshing a movement that maybe members have forgotten. And you know that if you don't teach it in a specific way, certain problems are going to crop up. You know that certain problems are going to be inevitable. So you anticipate those problems, and then what you do is you build this teaching plan around it. Now, the reason I'm calling it teachable chunks is because they're modular. You don't need to teach the same exact sequence every single time, but what you want to do is you want to think about how it all fits together. So once you have your teaching sequence planned out, you can pick and choose your chunks based on the anticipated problems. So that's a lot to think about. I'll go ahead and give some examples, and then we can talk about how we can develop our own teachable chunks and how we can troubleshoot and improvise. Okay, so like I said, teachable chunks can be any number of techniques that get you the result you want. In a lot of cases, it's going to be some sort of progressive movement introduction. But I'm going to give you a few examples just to get you to know what I'm thinking about, and then you'll start seeing them in all the videos. And the goal of today is to get you to start thinking about teachable chunks that you can take, ones that I've used for you, and you want to start taking these teaching sequences, these chunks, you want to start putting them in your toolbox so that when you're teaching a class, if something comes up, even if you hadn't anticipated it and you haven't actually done the prep for it that day, you can go back and think, oh, I know, I've done this before, okay? I've seen this problem before. How did we fix it last time? How do we prevent it from happening? And then you can pull that out and apply it on the fly. So different examples of teachable chunks, okay? If I'm working on a class and we're going to have some variation of tire jumps, jumping in and out of tires, flip jumps, etc., okay? I know one of the biggest issues is going to be confidence. So one way I might anticipate that is if I do the progressive stick jumps. And this is the one with the partners where you have the partners come down, partner jumps over, back and forth, and you gradually increase the height until you show the partner that they're jumping over the height of the tire so that they can clear it. And then if they still have confidence issues, they can practice either jumping into the tire, out of the tire, on top of the tire, whatever you can do to progressively shape that movement to affect the confidence. Once you've done this once, okay, even if in our coaching notes we don't say, oh, use progressive stick jumps, you've got that. So if you're teaching a class and you see a few people are hesitant to jump in and out of tires, you think back, how did I solve this last time? Oh, okay, I used the progressive stick jumps. That's an example of a teachable chunk that you can use. Another example is kettlebell swings and pulse planks. So classic thing, you have people doing their kettlebell swings and they end up in this overarched position, all right? A teachable chunk that I use literally almost every single time I teach the kettlebells, okay, is I show people a plank and I say, okay guys, is this a good plank or a bad plank? Bad plank, why? Well, because your back is hyperextended, you're arching, your lumbar spine is an extension, whatever. How can I fix it? Squeeze your abs, tighten your bum, okay? So once you do that, you can say the same thing. Is this a good top of the kettlebell swing? No. Okay, so what do? You squeeze your abs, tighten your bum, stand tall, all right? And then you can get people swinging, and sometimes I'll even do the pulse planks, where from here, I actively have people, from here, I actually actively have them contract and relax, contract and relax, contract and relax. And then I tell them, look, what you're doing there is the same thing you're doing when you have a kettlebell swing, at the top of the kettlebell swing, I'm not just letting my back overarch like that. At the top, I'm actively contracting, just like when I'm doing those pulse planks. At the top, I actively contract my abs. So you have that. That's a teachable chunk. Next time you're teaching kettlebell swings, you see people over extending their lumbar spine, you can take them, show them the plank example, and that gets them thinking about how they can fix the top of their kettlebell swing. Next one is if we're working on crawls. If I think about crawls, I know the issue is going to be complexity. So what I need to do is I need to go back to the simplest version that I can. And because most people, their limiting factor, excuse me, is going to be contralateral movements, I start off with the simplest contralateral movements I can, and then I'll gradually add complexity, movement, speed, etc. So first thing I might do marching in place. Then I might do some power skips. Once I've done that, I'll get them down in quadruped position. I'll get them to do some bird dog variations like that. Gets the contralateral moving. After that, maybe I'll do some baby crawls. Okay. After that, I'll do some leopard crawl touches. And then I'll have them crawling. Okay. And I know that if I teach the crawls in that sequence and I progressively add complexity to the contralateral movements, that I'll have much, much more success than if I just have people crawl. Now again, you might have crawling in your workout and it might not talk about all these progressions that come before, but you've seen these chunks before and you're developing your own. So if you do anticipate that some of your members are going to have problems with that, keep those teachable chunks in the back of your mind so you can pull them out when you need them. Other examples, okay, this is a big one, is snatch progressions. So every single time I teach a snatch, I like to use more or less the same progression, which is just going to be some variation of a T-Rex swing into an uppercut swing, into a snatch, and then from there I teach the way down. I'll say unzip your jacket, milk jug pour, punch yourself in the stomach, whatever, and then we work on that. Now, every single time that I teach a snatch, I'm not necessarily going to do every single part of the progression. If it's a new group, then I will, or if we haven't done it in a while, I will. But you can just take little bits of these modular chunks and you could use them. So I can remember, okay, last time I taught the snatch 2 weeks ago, people had trouble punching out. So that just means I'm going to spend more time on the uppercut swing and really getting people to aggressively punch out. I don't need to teach every single part of the sequence. I just need to think which part of the sequence solves what problem. So it's really key that you know the why and you think about why these progressions work. If they're not sensible to you, you can ask a more experienced coach, or you could even come up with progressions that make sense to you that solve the problems that you notice. Another example, this is a useful sequence that we do a lot in peer coaching, and this is actually a whole peer coaching unit, but there's also a teachable chunk built into it. And that's just getting people to this idea of the power pop. So the power pop is when you start, you have soft knees, hips are back just a little bit. You just have a little bit of potential energy here, a little bit of potential energy here. And then you think about exploding up. You don't have to jump. You just think about standing as tall as you can to generate vertical power. So I'll fit that into the warm up. And then we'll do a sequence where we'll talk about the difference between a strict press and see how heavy people can strict press. Then we get them to start working on their power pops to make the kettlebell float just using their leg power. And then we blast it up and people realize that all of a sudden they're much, much stronger. Maybe they're 20, 30% stronger with that power pop. And the reason that one's useful is it gets people lifting a heavier weight than they thought was possible. It's a very good way to break plateaus. Once you get people doing push presses, maybe you have a client who's always been afraid to press with a 16. Once they get that 16 overhead with the push press, A, they're learning how to push press, which is really valuable. But then B, they know that it's possible, so that they can start aspiring to get a strict press as well with the 16. So that's another example. Other things I might do stack carries, an overhead carry showing a good form and a bad form. So I do this one quite a lot. I'll often do it with double kettlebells, but I've got single kettlebells today, so I'll just do that. So with this, All right, I'll establish, everybody knows what a good overhead position is, elbows straight, everything stacked from this position, stacked from this position, and I'll have people walk with the best form that they can do. So we're doing an overhead march or an overhead walk, 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 walk. And then I'll elicit bad form and overhead position. So elbows bent, maybe your humerus is out like this. People keep it loose, and then they'll try to walk, and they'll feel how bouncy it is, okay, and how tired their arms get. Then you can have them try it again with a stack position. They'll see that it's better. So this is a good way of sort of embedding, physical memory into people by doing this sort of sandwich technique of showing good, bad, good. You don't even have to do the full sandwich. You could just show them good technique, then bad technique, and establish that good technique is better. Another sequence we might do, if I'm going to do a lot of work on hollow bodies, which will also be connected to various hanging techniques from the bars, which will also be connected to handstand. I want to make sure people have that core stability. I might do the classic sequence of having partners check lumbar control to see if there's any space in the lumbar spine when you lie on the ground. Show them the baby position, have them come out to hollow, test the hollow position, and then apply it to whatever core work we're doing today so people know how to maintain that tension. That's a big one. Another useful one I've been doing quite a lot, especially from when we do windmills, is the various progressions for kettlebell windmills and kneeling windmills. So a lot of times you'll have people who sort of think a windmill is a side bend. You need to teach them that it's a hinge plus a thoracic twist. So the way I'll do this one is in the warm-up, I'll just have everybody start and do some variation of thoracic twist like this, maybe like this. Maybe I'll have one leg forward sometimes. Whatever, you get people twisting, good. And then you get people doing some variation of a body weight hinge, okay? So once you've got that, sometimes what I'll do is I'll have this dowel, put the dowel up here. This is a short dowel today, but I think I'll be able to get by with it. Have people do a few twists, have people do a few hinges, have people twist, and then do a hinge, okay? And then this will all come together. You have them on the ground. You have people go ahead and they twist to their leading leg. They practice their hinge with their open lunge position, and then you have them do both at the same time. So I want you to hinge, I want you to twist, okay? And then when you have them go ahead and work on their kettlebell windmill, okay, all of a sudden they have the technique that they've been learning, and when they actually have weight in their hands, they're not spending all this time trying to think about what goes where because they've already embedded the movement. So that's another good example of that. Last one, this is the one I'm going to talk about for a little bit, is in kettlebell and hinge progressions. Often we'll talk about the car door example, pushing a bum back with the car door. So maybe you might have some kind of hinge progression, the car door, having a partner do the bum tap, the progressive bum tap. After that, the dowel hinge, and get people to look at the lumbar spine. After that, you're going to have some variation of the goat hinge, or maybe halo it up to this version. And then after that, maybe have people try to work on some kind of progressive kettlebell swing like that. That's an example of a teachable chunk. Now, you don't need to do every single sequence. You don't need to do the car door with the bum taps or the dowel hinge, okay? You just need to know how that whole sequence fits together so that you can regress if somebody's having problems, or you can progress and jump past it if people are getting it. And that's what I'm going to talk about in a second, which is this element of improvisation, which I'll talk about in more detail in another video and another blog post. But when you're teaching your chunks, make sure that your chunks are there to fix a specific problem. You don't need to do the entire sequence every single time. Sometimes I'll plan a full hinge progression. I'll get the group together. I'll realize that actually everyone in the group already has really nice solid hinges, so I can skip the car door, I can skip the standing hinge work, or maybe just do it lightly. I can skip over the dowel hinge work, and I can go straight into the kettlebell swings. You don't need to do every single time. If people come in and they're already at part, I don't know, like part E, then you don't have to spend time on A, B, C, D. You can recognize, okay, you guys are further along than I thought, or you guys aren't having trouble with this. Actually, the anticipated problems I have aren't relevant because they're not showing up, so I can go right into the next progression. So just remember, again, these chunks are modular. You don't have to do every single step. You can sort of decide what's useful today. Do I need to regress a little bit? Do I need to progress a little bit? Or do I need to take a different tack? Is what is the problem that I anticipated not the problem that's showing up? Maybe I thought that people were going to overextend on the kettlebell swings, but actually what I see is people are afraid to load up the hamstrings on the kettlebell swings. So that means I need to very quickly think about another relevant teachable chunk, and then I can focus on that instead of whatever my original plans were based on the anticipated problems that I had. So the key to developing your own teachable chunks, or the key to applying the teachable chunks that we teach you, is to think about the why. As always, the question is the why. Why are you doing this? Well, what's the problem you're trying to solve, essentially? So the way I would do this is if I were developing a teachable chunk, or I were deciding what teachable chunks were useful, is I would look over the plan for the day. I'd look at the movements, and I would do my anticipated problems. What could go wrong? What could go wrong with a kettlebell swing? What could go wrong with crawling? What could go wrong if I'm introducing cleans, etc. So I want to anticipate the problems, and then I want to make sure I identify the limitations. So for example, when crawling, if I know that people are going to get confused in crawling, I know the limitation is probably going to be issues of complexity. So if it's issues of complexity, that means I need to simplify. If I'm working on jumping, then I know that the limitation is probably going to be some form of anxiety or lack of confidence or something like that. So that means I need to work on some sort of exposure or shaping progression to work over confidence issues. So when we do the progressive stick jumps, okay, that's a form of exposure or shaping training, which means that you're getting people closer and closer to whatever the behavior is that they have a fear of that causes them anxiety. And as they spend more and more time doing a movement that's similar to it, their anxiety levels are going to go down, and that's going to build up their confidence, okay? With crawling, like I said, it's complexity. So you want to find simpler and simpler regressions until you find something that people can do that they're successful in, that's not frustrating, that they're not getting flustered. And then you can gradually add complexity to the movement as their brain learns how to do it. So the process is anticipate problems. Look at your programming, anticipate problems. Identify the limitations, and also know the common faults and fatigues. How will this movement break down when people are tired? What are the most common faults? How can we anticipate that? Then, once you have that in mind, you design some sort of progressive chunk to address it. Once you've delivered that, so in class you've actually delivered it, okay, observe, is it effective? Take notes, reiterate what worked, what didn't work, all right? And also be ready to improvise and adjust on the ground. Maybe you thought this was a problem and it's not, okay? Or maybe there's something you completely didn't anticipate and it becomes a problem. Other things I would say is, remember, chunks are specific to a problem, okay? If I see this issue, then I'll do this. Don't just think about, oh, how do I fix kettlebell swings? Oh, the way I fix kettlebell swings is always going to be the same way. I always fix kettlebell swings by showing people planks first. Well, that's only going to work if the problem is that people are overextending. If people aren't loading up their hamstrings, or if they're not producing power from the swing, these are different issues. So if I see people that have trouble generating power at the top of the swing, then I might do the kettlebell swing throw, all right? If I see people who are overarching, I might do the plank. If I have people that aren't extending their hips all the way, then I can do various hip extension and glute squeezing drills. So just make sure that the chunk addresses the problem. All right, cool. So if you want to know more about this, make sure you read the accompanying article, okay? And like I said, the article will have some examples of teachable chunks in it. It's also going to have links to some videos. We have the crawling video, and then my big kettlebell swing video. Those are two examples of teachable chunks that'll be useful. And now when you're looking at your programming, look at how we incorporate teachable chunks into our peer coaching or into our warm-ups, and start taking those chunks and making them your own, so that next time when you're teaching something, even if that teachable chunk isn't present explicitly, All right. Remember that you can pull it out and use it whenever you want to. It's your tool now, so you can use it however you want.